Lies, truth, and resistance in totalitarian systems. 1. Purpose and scope. You examine how political lying scales from routine spin to a comprehensive fiction that engulfs public and private life, signaling the rise of totalitarian rule. You assess why such systems seek to transform reality into narrative and how this deformation corrodes law, culture, and civic virtue. You also preview remedies grounded in moral agency and civil courage that resist the consolidation of untruth. Footnote. This section frames the inquiry and announces a method that treats lying as a structural design choice rather than an episodic fault. 2. The architecture of the big lie. You analyze the big lie as a unifying myth that organizes power and rationalizes repression. Historical regimes used racial or economic fictions to justify hierarchy and coercion, while a cascade of smaller lies normalized daily compliance. You treat the big lie as a governance technology that saturates education, media, statistics, and memory, thereby converting civic reality into an administered script. Footnote. This section explains how a single foundational falsehood ramifies into a system that manages perception and conduct. 3. Complicity and civic causation. You reject a victim-only narrative and trace responsibility to citizens who applaud, echo, or silently tolerate untruth. Without mass cooperation, a ruling minority remains brittle. You show how fear, opportunism, and exhaustion make living with a lie feel safer than dissent, yet this safety is illusory because each concession enlarges the reach of the system. Footnote. This section relocates causation from elites alone to social consent that sustains totalizing power. 4. A personal revolution of responsibility. You propose that the primary arena of reform is the self. When you cultivate responsibility, courage, and moral clarity, you deprive the system of the psychic fuel it requires. You argue that legal structures matter, yet the decisive inflection occurs when individuals refuse inward capitulation and reorder daily practices toward truth. Footnote. This section identifies internal reform as the precondition for external change. 5. Non-participation in lies. You adopt a rule that the rule shall not hold through you. You decline to repeat what you know is false, you avoid rituals that certify propaganda, and you refuse signatures, slogans, or gestures that disclaim your conscience. You accept personal costs while insisting that small withdrawals of assent can accumulate into systemic stress. Footnote. This section offers a justiciable ethic of refusal that is modest in form yet radical in effect. 6. Living within the truth. You replace negation with an affirmative practice. You speak plainly, create honestly, and act spontaneously in work, art, worship, and association. You place morality above unjust commands and tolerate ridicule as the price of integrity. You treat truth-telling as a public good that reopens cultural possibility and interrupts the drift toward stagnation. Footnote. This section defines an affirmative discipline that builds parallel spaces of dignity and meaning. 7. Culture as counterpower. You study how music, literature, and independent associations can puncture the script of untruth. Modest acts by unknown citizens can catalyze solidarity when they reveal the gap between official narrative and lived reality. You show that cultural courage prepares the ground on which legal and political reforms later stand. Footnote. This section traces how small cultural breaches can widen into civic renewal. 8. The brittleness of totalitarian systems. You argue that such systems look monolithic yet depend on constant injections of fear and fabrication. A single visible refusal can expose the game and make the crust of conformity appear thin. You highlight why authorities persecute even harmless dissenters, since truth erodes the only adhesive the system possesses. Footnote. This section explains fragility in the regime impulse to overreact to minor acts of honesty. 9. The jurisprudence of individual action. You assess how one person alters the equilibrium of public life. Withdrawal of assent changes the incentives of neighbors, officials, and institutions by demonstrating that another way of living remains available. You contend that character is constitutional in effect, since the habits of citizens become the unwritten law of a polity. Footnote. This section links private integrity to public order and treats courage as a civic doctrine. 10. Choosing sides. You face a binary that cannot be outsourced. You either stand with truth and freedom or you accept lies and malevolent authority. Titles, expertise, and social standing cannot launder cowardice. You conclude that a free society arises when enough people decline the warmth of submission and accept the risks of honest speech and action. Footnote. This section closes with a normative choice that assigns dignity to truth and shame to complicity.